Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. John Schmeelk, joined by friend of the program, Matt Miller from ESPN in the Hackensack Meridian Health podcast studio. Keep getting better. Matt, good to talk to you, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, man. Getting excited for this draft. Excited to talk some Giants with you today.
Yeah, we were recording this right before, literally, the Shedeur Sanders Pro Day starts. So keep in mind, this will be airing early next week. So fans, we don't talk about the Shedeur Sanders Pro Day. That's why. But we are going to start with Shedeur Sanders, Matt, and that's because in your 7-round mock draft, and we'll go through all the picks quickly that you had last week, you had Shedeur Sanders going to the Giants at 3. And I'm struggling with this, to be honest with you, because I understand the value when you're this high, you want to try to get your quarterback. But then I look at my grades on Hunter, Carter, and Sanders next to each other, and I just can't like crawl over the crest of the hill to get over to do it myself. So what was
Yeah,
your thought process here?
I'm with you. It's the same thing, John. And as you know, mock drafts they're not what we see, they're what we hear and what we think, right? Like what we think will happen. And at the time that I wrote that mock draft, it's probably been about 2 weeks now. It was right when Russell Wilson signed. And I'm trying to weigh how much does a 1 year, $10.5 million contract for Russell Wilson matter? And it's also like I have heard all season long, no team has done more work on Shedeur Sanders than the New York Giants. No team. And I didn't hear that from the Giants. I heard that from someone at Colorado. And as you said, you and I are talking, the showcase is happening. The Giants sent basically the entire organization to Boulder, Colorado, which is beautiful, but not really a place you want to go early April unless you're going there to see a player. And so it is tough. And so I put Shedeur there at 3. Would I say I have 100% conviction on it? No, not at all. Would I say I have 75% conviction on it? No. But I think there's a 50% shot that it's Shedeur Sanders, and I think there's a 50% shot it's his teammate Travis Hunter. So it is. Yeah, I think a Colorado Buffalo could be in New York in 3 weeks. Which one? We will see. But I at least think it's a possibility at this point that they would consider Shedeur Sanders because to your point, the value and the idea that if there's a quarterback there that you love, you have to draft them no matter what you do in free agency. And with Russ and Jameis being locked up for a year, that doesn't keep you from doing anything at pick number 3.
I agree with you. Now, let's say you get to pick 3, and this is not going to happen, but I'm just putting Matt Miller in the GM chair here. And you're not worrying about anything except making the team as good as you can. And you have Shedeur Sanders sitting there, Travis Hunter sitting there, and you have Abdul Carter sitting there. If you are Matt Miller GM, which one of those 3 players are you taking?
I take Abdul Carter because he's the best player in the draft, and it's tough because like from a needs standpoint, I would say he's third on that list. Behind a quarterback and a wide receiver slash corner. But I love Abdul Carter. I think he's going to be special. Now it does break down to like, okay, how would he fit with Brian Burns? How does he fit with Kayvon? You figure it out basically,
Yeah.
right? You can never have too many pass rushers. It's a good problem to have. I love the idea of Travis Hunter in New York as well, though, just because, playing next to Malik Neighbors, playing next to Paulson Adebo, like you have the ability to do a little bit of both and kind of solve 2 problems with 1 pick. So with all these guys, I could talk myself into loving the pick. I could talk myself into loving Shedeur for the Giants even. My pick, if Joe Shane mysteriously disappears in the next 3 weeks and they need me to fill in, it would be Abdul Carter would be the pick just again because I think he is the best player in this draft. And this is a team that is, and I say this about all teams, bad teams just draft good football players. Don't get caught up in the needs. Just draft good football players because ultimately you're going to need them. Your history of drafting is not strong enough to say that any player really is a foundational prospect. Malik Neighbors looks like he's going to be one. I'm a big fan of the defensive line and the prospects to have in New York, but this is not a team that's good enough to ignore great football players at this point.
Just keep building the foundation and get as many foundational players as you can. I'm with you. All
Yep.
right, round 2, you have the Giants selecting a Mega Egbuka, which I won't take the need out of it. I think the second group of wide receivers in this draft, Matt, is interesting. Now, you have Luther Burden ahead of Tech McMillan even on your board. So I know you're higher on
Yeah.
him. So let's take him out of the equation. I think the Golden Egbuka, who I do have slightly above this next group, but then the Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins. I think that is I love the day 2 group of wide receivers here a lot more than I like the day 1 group. If you need a number 2 wide receiver, you already have a 1. This is a great draft to find one on day 2.
I am with you 100%. And I have Ibuka a little bit higher. I have him at kind of the bottom of the first tier. I have a first round or top 32 grade on him, I should say. I'm with you. I'm fascinated by the round two wide receiver group. The two guys from Iowa State, excuse me, Jalen Noel, Jaden Higgins. I love both. Trey Harris from Ole Miss. I think he's been slept on a little bit because he had an injury this past year. Savion Williams from TCU is a really fun offensive weapon. Funny thing about Savion Williams, I talked to someone at TCU. He had the strongest arm in the team. He throw football 80 yards.
Is that
But he
true?
also,
I mean, he's
yes,
huge. I mean, I'm not
you see,
surprised by
right?
that.
But Wildcat quarterback, he ran for 6 touchdowns and then caught six more. So he's kind of a gadget guy, but how fun would that be to have
Yeah,
a
and
weapon
I
like
got a
that?
question for you. Have you talked to them why they didn't use him more on contested catches down the field? Because when he did it, he was great at it, but they didn't have him do it a ton.
The feedback I got was that their offense was not good enough to do that. Basically, like they didn't trust, to do that. Which that's I'm not a coach. They're there every day. If that's the feedback, I respect it. But I'm with you. I love this day two class. I got to throw Jack Bash in there from also from TCU. Another guy. I mean, the way that they didn't use both those guys is confounding. It is tough, but we have that every year with players. I think we could look at Iowa State and say, you got these two guys, and that was your offense this year. Say, okay. And I love Kyle Williams from Washington State. If you go back and watch Cam Ward when he was at Washington State, watch he and Kyle Williams against Colorado, and you're going to see a really, really good player. He had a great Senior Bowl. You and I were both down there, so I'm with you. And I'm kind of a wide receiver guy. Like I love wide receivers, and this year is one of those where I keep getting more and more excited the more I watch.
I'm going to put in the same category as those TCU guys. I watched Isaac Tesla at the combine and I'm like, wow, all right,
Yes.
that is a great workout. Then I looked at his stats and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go look at the tape now and I'm going to look at a guy that has no idea what he's doing and he's just a workout warrior. Then I put on the
Yeah.
tape and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, why isn't this guy have monster numbers? He's actually a really good route runner. He gets in and out of his breaks tremendously well. Like the workout numbers actually show up on the tape. I'm like, why aren't his numbers better?
So I live right there. I live very close to University of Arkansas. I go to practices in the summer. I go to a couple games a year. It's bad quarterback play, and his teammate Andrew Armstrong is a very good wide receiver as well. Just tough as hell. Really good underneath guy. They could not get them the ball. They lost a great tight end prospect for next year. Luke has he transferred to, I believe he went to Ole Miss, and he's a great tight end prospect. They couldn't get any of them the ball, and so Arkansas, they're gonna it's going to be a bit of an uphill climb for them next season, but it is remarkable. And I think this is a great broader point. You mentioned how much I love Luther Burden. I think when scouting wide receivers or tight ends, we sometimes forget that they're dependent on the quarterback and the scheme. You can be as great as you could ever be. You are dependent on your quarterback to get you the ball and the scheme to call your number. And if those things don't happen, your stats are going to drop. And it's why with receivers, statistics matter. They absolutely do, but only in context. And I think with all these guys, when you're looking at just the box score, you're going to miss a lot because you have to add in the context of they weren't playing with Cam Ward at quarterback or Shador Sanders at quarterback, or they weren't playing in a great scheme all the time. So it's definitely something you have to factor in.
Yeah, for guys like Burden, guys like Jackson Dart, even as a quarterback, like these college schemes, man, it's hard to watch these guys in a college scheme and then really get a feel for how they're going to translate, right? Because they're just not
Mhm.
doing NFL things and they might be really good about what they're being asked to do, but how does that translate to the pros, which to me is still the biggest challenge of scouting every year and figuring out what guys are going to translate and which guys aren't.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's funny because like we all watch the NFL. The NFL, like there's 32 teams. They run like three offenses, right? Like you have your Shanahan, your McVay, and your old school West Coast to some degree, but it's like it's not that dissimilar. You get to college and it's like the Wild West. You got 100 different offenses, and it does make it tough. I have really started to lean harder into analytics as I do this job longer. I'm trying to solve the puzzle as many ways as I can, right? Give me all the answers that are out there, but as much as we love numbers and analytics, they do require context, and especially for wide receivers.
Yeah, like Trey Harris, for example, like his yards per route run are just off the charts. Even though he plays in a very simple offense, that's one of the things you can kind of look at for a player like that. All right, you got a couple of pass rushers for the Giants. Round three, their first pick is 65. You have Darius Alexander, the defensive tackle, and then Braden Swinson in the fourth round. And boy, Matt, we've talked about this before when we've talked offline. This is just a super deep class at edge and at
Yeah.
defensive tackle. How deep does that go? And what for you is the sweet spot? Is it worth waiting till rounds 3 and 4 just because there's so many of these guys?
I think edge rusher, I love round three. I love round four. You mentioned Braden Swinson. I have a third round grade on him, but and Swinson wasn't the only guy. So many of these players just kind of fell down the board as I did a 7 round mock. And it was like, there's no way this guy should be available here, but he is. And so the value is so good that you kind of have to jump on him. I think for defensive tackle, we'll probably see it late second round, John, is where like guys like Darius Alexander, Josh Farmer. I love Ty Robinson from Nebraska, especially if you need a five technique. They're probably going to be late second round guys. So if I had to, excuse me, if I just stack my board, I would probably say D tackle. I'm going to go late round two. Edge rusher, I think you can get into round three, maybe even round four, and you're still getting some like quality players who can be at least, like a primary rush defender. Like we could find those in round four this year. Guys like Antoine Powell Ryland from Virginia Tech, or Ashton Gallat from Louisville. Like there are going to be good players in round four at the edge position.
Or even maybe Olufemi Oladejo from UCLA can drop that far, right? Who has all the tools.
He's fascinating.
I know.
Fascinating to me. And I have a second round grade on him. And I'll
So do
tell you,
I.
it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned him because I talked to someone 2 days ago, and they said, you know who my shocker first round pick is Femi from UCLA. And he said, you know what? That would be a shock, but could I see it? Like, yeah. I mean, I could just because of the position he plays as an edge rusher. And I mean, they had this guy playing slot at times, but he can play space. He can play with his hand down. So he's a fascinating prospect that unfortunately we spend a lot of our time talking about three or four players and guys like that kind of get lost.
Yeah, no question about it. By the way, all these articles we're referencing that Matt that you can find over at ESPN.com. The Giants Huddle podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Giants. From game day celebrations to your everyday financial needs, Big Blue fans can get the most out of every moment with Citizens. Learn more at citizensbank.com/Giants.
Huddle up, get in here. If you're lined up here, you gotta go over the middle with it to score.
Right. How do we make that happen?
I don't know, but Citizens does. Make sense of your money with Citizens, official bank of Eli Manning.
You mentioned the draft in general. I do think, and we'll get to your first round grades in a second, once you get past these first 15, 16, 17 guys, people are going to be shocked what players get picked in the final 12 picks of that first round. Because my
Yeah.
understanding is from picks 20 to like 60, boards around the league are all over the place. Are you hearing the same thing?
I am, and I'm seeing the same thing. My board is that way. I put a number grade on every player. It kind of helps me, and I'm at that point of the process. You mentioned I just put out my final first round grade, so those players are locked in. I could tell you how many players I have like an 80 on, which equates to like a late second round pick, right? I have so many 80 grades, and I don't have a lot of third round grades, so it kind of evens out. But it is certainly one of those years, and I've talked to teams about that, and they've said the same, John. It's like guys drafted in the 20s this year. And here was a prediction I heard that it's going to be like, we're going to see teams bet on good football players who have good football character because like, I don't want to throw any names under the bus, but there's going to be guys that fall in this draft because of football character. And you're going to say like, wait, I thought he was going to be a first round pick, but in a draft that lacks a lot of superstars, a lot of true first round grades, teams are going to default to, hey, like, first round, we need a guy who can contribute and who's not going to be a problem for us. And I've had conversations with folks from other organizations who are really leaning into that philosophy of we need guys who love football and played it at a high level. And I think we're going to see that in this draft where we don't see as many projects in the first round. We're going to see a lot more proven, ready to go players.
Yeah, I said this to somebody the other day as well, where I think once you get past pick 20, if there's a guard that's just going to be a good starter, like a Tyler Booker. Like I've seen some of the
Absolutely.
mock drafts where he's like a mid-second round pick. I'm like, you guys are out of your mind. He is such a safe player and his character is so high. Some team, instead of rolling the dice on some guy that could bust out in 2 years, is going to pick him at 22 just because they know what they're getting. It's not a sexy position. He doesn't test really well, but he's a good football player.
Yeah, I feel that way about he and about Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia, because Malachi had kind of a down year. He had to play out of position. It affected his game. He needs to be a free safety, not a slot corner. That's regardless. But same thing, super high character. He was an All-American for 3 straight years. Like players like that don't fall. I don't care if they run a 4.5 in the 40. Everything else is okay. And in this draft, especially, and that's why Malachi Starks. I've put this on social media. We have a group of players in this class that are being overthought. And Malachi Starks is certainly one of those that we're looking at it too much. Just go back to where you thought he was in December. He's a great football player. He should be drafted pretty high.
All right, you have Darius Alexander, and I think when the Giants picked that defensive tackle is interesting because they need one next to Dexter Lawrence, and
Yeah.
I think there are what I like about this class. It's so big and so deep. There are guys in both groups, right? You have the pass rushing three techs, but you also have the run stopping, one shades, guys like that can play nose. So I kind of want the Giants to get one of each. So I guess my question for you is that which group do you think is deeper? Which one do you attack first? Which one do you think you can wait on? How would you approach that if you're the Giants?
Yeah. So I think it's deeper in that like one tech group, especially outside of the first round. The Giants aren't going to take Mason Graham, they're not going to take Kenneth Grant, those two guys. And it's funny because Michigan has like the two guys who are the picture for each position, really. So after that, it's like, so I do think, there's a way to attack this. Like I really like Tyleik Williams from Ohio State, and I think he could be a really good one technique. 322 pounds, he could play in that shade, he could be disruptive there. He's a top 50 pick probably, but he could maybe slide a little bit past that. Josh Farmer from Florida State, who I mentioned earlier, I think would be a really fun one technique prospect as well. He's probably going to go late second, early third. So, and then we get into the third round. There's a lot of guys like Cam Jackson from Florida who would fit that mold. Jamari Caldwell from Oregon is going to be a player like that. Whereas the three techniques, I feel like are going to come off a little quick because Mason Graham's going to go quick. Walter Nolan is a fascinating player whose draft range is, the distance from me in Missouri to you in New Jersey right now, it feels like. But after that, it's like, okay, who are your three techniques? And I do think that's where Darius Alexander comes in.
I
like Derek Harmon too.
Fantastic.
I have him as a 5 technique like in my mind. So, and I just talked about him on TV yesterday as a 5 technique, but I love him as well. And I think he's a first round pick, but it feels like a draft that is a little light on 3 techniques. I mean, TJ Sanders from South Carolina is fun, if not undersized. I like Jordan Phillips a lot, another undersized guy, but I think we could see the 3 techniques come off the board a little bit faster.
Yeah, and I think pass rushers always go before the run stoppers. I'm with you on that. All right, you have Brashard Smith to the Giants in the 7th round. He's a great receiving back. I love Marcus Yarns too. I put in that same category as a good receiving back. Who's your guy that's going to drop to around 4 or 5 in this running back class, where you can get a guy that maybe in another year might go, start around 3, just because this running back class is so deep? And you mentioned this in your scouting report that it's so deep, people might just not pick running backs early because they all think they can get one later.
Exactly. And I have so many of these players, but RJ Harvey is probably my favorite non-Ashton Genty running back in this class. I mean, he's a little bit older, former quarterback. He has so much pop and power to his game. I actually posted on social that he's this year's Bucky Irving to me, a guy that's being a little over analyzed, but is going to be a very, very good rookie starting type running back. If he gets to the right setup, he could be a 1,000-yard guy. So I love RJ Harvey. And I had some folks push back and be like, nah, he's a 3rd rounder. And I agree on grades. He absolutely is. But I think to your point, like we could see teams wait on running back. Do you need to take one in the 2nd round if guys are there in the 4th? But it is such a deep group. I like DJ Giddens from Kansas State a lot. It's, kind of a powerful runner, 6'1", 212 with really good athletic ability. I'll continue to go to bat for Jaden Blue from Texas. He had some fumble issues early in his career, but he seemed to figure that out. Second half of last season, what he does as a receiver out of the backfield has so much value. And we saw that in the college football playoffs. So those are 3 guys I think will be day 3 picks that could be, they could be fantastic players right out of the gate.
Your other picks for the Giants in the mock, and you can attack these however you want. You had Barrett Carter as a Giants 2nd, 3rd round pick. Very light class on inside linebackers, so there's not a lot of them you can pick high. Then you have Jalen Travis, who did a decent job at the Senior Bowl at tackle. I think you have him moving into guard, right, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then you have, I mentioned Brashard Smith, Xavier Truss, the big Georgia offensive lineman. Take me those 3 guys and why you thought those would be good fits in New York.
Yeah, I think addressing linebacker, getting more speed on defense is a big need. And you mentioned it. It is a weak linebacker class. And so I going through the mock, I'm looking at team needs. I'm looking at future contracts, and I see Barrett Carter on the board. It was like, man, this might be a little early for Giants fans to go linebacker, but I love him there. And a guy who his career almost like declined a little bit, but Clemson did during his career. I mean, he was so productive every year there. For a long time, I thought, oh, this is a weak side linebacker only, but I think he could play on the inside in a 3-4. He's going to give you that run chase ability. He's incredibly smart and instinctive. So I'm a big fan of his. Then you mentioned the offensive line. I'm going to continue to say, like, until this offensive line gets solved, throw picks at it. Especially when you play in that division now, with how good Philly's D-line is every year. Dallas has Micah Parsons and Osa Odigizua. Washington is very committed to their defensive line. They've drafted a lot there recently. They've brought in guys. So I think you just got to continue to address the offensive line you got to take swings of the bat until you can get that group solidified up front.
All right, let's go to your notebook, and then we'll touch briefly on your first-round grades here. Travis Hunter, you have good notes in there about what position you think many teams will use him at, and I think the consensus is both in some way, but what does the balance look like? How do you manage that? Like, I look at the Giants. I think if he gets in the building, if Brian Dable, an offensive coach, really going to say, I'm just going to let him play defense most of the time. I have a hard time believing that, but I actually have him graded as a better corner than a receiver. So I'm curious what you're hearing about how teams think they're going to use one of the most unique prospects we've seen in a long time.
It varies team by team. I've talked to a lot of the teams in the top 5 or 6 picks, and I've heard a lot of different answers, but primarily it does kind of depend on your head coach's background. I think in Cleveland, they've even come out and said, we see him as a wide receiver first. I would expect the Giants would as well. I think the Patriots would be fascinating because of Mike Vrabel, but you also have Drake May that you're trying to support. I think in New England, we might see a true 50-50 split on how Travis Hunter's played. Now, how do you manage it early? I'm like fascinated by him because I think he has like his love of the game, his conditioning, his work ethic. Like I don't know we've ever seen someone like this, right? That said, going from Colorado where on offense, they just signaled in routes to him and he ran them. You can get away with that in college. I don't know if you can get away with that in the NFL. And I would say this, like we've seen so many guys come in who are like positionless or, two-way type players and they've struggled. So for Travis Hunter, I would say get good at one thing first, because that jump from college to the NFL is going to be really, really difficult. It is for everyone. You're not an exception to that rule, right? It's hard for every single player who does this. Get good, get comfortable at one thing first, and then sprinkle in others. I prefer him at receiver because of his body type. I think at 6 foot, 185 pounds, I don't want him tackling guys. If he's drafted by the Giants, I don't want him tackling A.J. Brown. I don't want him tackling Saquon Barkley. I don't want that for his shoulders. And I think you have an athlete in this era of the NFL. You want to score points. This is an offensive-driven league. I don't know that I would want to take the ball out of his hands watching just how electric he is as a receiver. And to your point, if you want to say, hey, I think he could be a top 5 corner in the NFL, I agree with you. I think he could too. But I also think he could be a top 5 receiver in the NFL. And it's funny because it's easier to find a great receiver. We see it every year, but a great receiver on a rookie contract saves you like $30 million a year. And so I would say like positional value, receiver is maybe the third most or fourth most important position to have on a rookie contract right now. And corner may be the very next one, but I would push him more to play wide receiver.
No, fair enough. All right. Now I'm going to kind of get your intel on what you're hearing around the league, and I'm going to relate it back to your first round list here. We kind of talked about not a lot of first round grades in this draft. You had 14, if I'm not mistaken, correct? On your list?
Yeah, which is low. Yeah.
It is low. Usually, I think last year I had a lot last year. I was thinking around 24 last year, just because
I think I was 18 to 20. Yeah,
it was a really good first round, and I'm less this year. I'm curious where we're different on our list, because I have a little bit more than you, but not a ton. Quarterbacks, I'm surprised you don't have Cam Ward with the first round grade, because I have him a bit above where I had J.J. McCarthy last year. I think you have him at below where you had McCarthy last year, correct?
It's very close, and I'm looking on my screen right now. It's very close. I think I had J.J. at 92. I'll have Cam at 91. So it was close. And it's above Penix, and it's above Nix, but he's my number 14 player. So he was basically the line.
Very interesting. Okay. And then the other quarterbacks for me. By the way, do you have Shedeur closer to Jackson Dart, or do you have Shedeur or whoever your third quarterback is? Maybe it's not Dart, or do you have him closer to Ward?
I have it a little closer to Ward. I have Shador right now as my number 22 overall player, and I have Jackson Dart at like 38. So they're almost like splitting each other, honestly.
I'm a big Tyler Shook guy, by the way. I've chosen to ignore the injuries and the age because he's a quarterback. I'm
Yeah,
sure I'm going to regret that. I just loved his tape this year so much. I can't get my head past it.
that's good. I mean, the Senior Bowl was fantastic, and I've told this story before. I had a scout grab me at the Senior Bowl and said that expletive is going to go a lot higher than you think, and he pointed at Tyler Shuck, and I was like, really? He was like top 50, and at the time that was like,
That was
oh my God, top 50. Now you'd be like, yeah, of course. But in late January, that was pretty surprising.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, so you're only running back Ashton Genty. I'm with you. I see a level between him and Omarion Hampton. We're on the same page
Same.
there. Genty's special, man. I don't know how people. I mean, he's just really, really good. I don't care he didn't test. We talked about Hunter and Burden already. All right, so Ted McMillan's interesting because I talked to people about Ted McMillan. There's no one in this building, and they give me like this weird nebulous sense of maybe there's something with when you talk to him, it's not all there, and they worry about some things, but his tape's really good. What are you things you're hearing about Ted McMillan? Because you talked about the draft range on Walter Nolan. I think the draft range on Ted McMillan's also very big. I know some people
It
like him
is.
as the sixth best player. Some people have him at the end of the first round.
Yeah, so I had him going six in my 7 round mock draft, and it was basically like the Raiders have no receivers. It wasn't based on my value. It was just based on
Right.
I did this on NFL Live. I was like, can anyone name the Raiders' top 3 receivers coming back for next year? Not Brock Bowers, right? Top 3 receivers. No. So I look at Ted McMillan, and I won't speak to the personality stuff because I haven't spoken to him, and I really try to
Same here.
avoid that. Of like I haven't sat down with him, so I'm not going to say whether or not he's it's clicking or not. On tape, I thought he had a down year. Some of that goes to Noah Fafita. It goes to a new head coach. Obviously, a lot of issues there. I worry a little bit about when a player has so many contested catches. My first thought is, can you separate? And that is the thing for me. And the pro day 40 time, the pro day, I think he came in at 4.55, which that probably means about a 4.6, which is good enough at 6'4", 215. But there's some drops this year that popped up that hadn't been a thing before. So it did kind of seem like his concentration was down a little bit. But man, he's incredibly productive the last 2 years. I have him as my number 18 overall player. I do feel like on social media people are like, oh, you hate him. No, I really don't. I have him at 18 overall out of like 900 players. I really, really like him. I do have some concerns about, he's going to need to be able to get into a scheme where they can get him open a little bit. I would love to see, like in 23, I felt like he ran more slants and he ran more like middle of the field screens, and they tried to just get him the ball a little bit more creatively. And I liked his game better there instead of just being this guy who's like, hey, just go down the field, we'll throw it up to you, because he is kind of short armed for being 6'4", and despite the fact that he's a great leaper, he has great vertical skills. I mean, there were some drops, there were some issues, and I think a lot of those contested catches in college are going to become incompletions in the NFL when you have size and speed at every corner and safety position.
If you want to know how to manage 2 minutes of crunch time football, I'm your man. But if you're wondering about a long-term financial plan, you should talk to Citizens. Hey, I can also talk lawn care.
I'd like to learn about a mowing routine.
Yes, I knew I could help. Make sense of your money with Citizens.
Yeah, what makes me suspicious is that no one can ever really put the finger on it for me with McMillan on why, and that makes me say maybe there isn't really anything there. I'm not trying to put anything out into the other there.
Yeah.
Like you, I've not talked to the kid, and he could be the best kid in the world. I have no idea. I'm just trying to figure out. And what makes me a little bit higher on him, Matt, and you're right, you don't see a ton of separation, but he's so quick with the ball in his hands after he catches it. And as a guy that's 6'4", at that weight, I feel like if he's got that type of wiggle with the ball, he should be able to figure out the stuff at the top of the route because he's got it inside him a little bit,
And that's where I go back to the 23 tape. The first game of his I ever watched, like tape I ever watched, he catches this middle of the field screen and he like shakes 2 guys and then he picks up like 12 yards. And it's like, okay, like that agility, I didn't see it in 24, but it's there. And I do think it goes back to some of like Jed Fish being gone. What did that do to this offense? And I hope he becomes Drake London, because I will always love a big bodied receiver, right? It's such a treat when you have a guy that can just be that for you. But I'm a little bit, I guess, I don't even want to say skeptical. I have my doubts, and that's the same with every player. But I think with his, they're a little more pronounced for me.
And by the way, I think if you made me bet, I'd say he's probably more like a really good number two a la T. Higgins than he is a number one, which, by the way, T.
Yeah.
Higgins just got $30 million. So that's not a
Right.
bad guy to be. All right, tight ends. I have these guys right on the edge of my true first round grades, Loveland and Warren. I don't think Warren's as good of an athlete as a lot of people tend to describe him as, and I think him not testing,
Mhm.
I think probably shows that. I think he has a lot of willingness and want as a blocker, but I think he also had a lot of misses as a blocker this year at Penn State. But I
Yeah.
love his size. I love his ability to run the seam and straight ahead ability and stuff like that. And then Loveland is just your classic, F move tight end. Like he reminds me of Dalton Kincaid a lot when we saw him a couple years ago. There where he if I wish the Bills used him a little bit more, but if you put Loveland in the right
Yeah.
situation, he could be a real big weapon in the pass game.
Yeah, and I think I know I'm different from my colleagues at ESPN. I haven't seen a consensus across draft media, but I have Colston Loveland as my top tight end. And I know that's a little bit of an outlier. I'm with you. I think he's Sam Laporta. I love his ability to move. I watched him at the Michigan Pro Day in 2024 when JJ McCarthy threw to him and fell in love. And then you watch his tape, and I know he was banged up this year, but you watch his tape the last 2 years, and like he can do everything. He really does. He's an underrated blocker. He can line up anywhere you could ever want him to. He runs routes like a wide receiver. Like I'm just such a big fan of his. I actually think, to your point, I think Colston Loveland is who a lot of people think Tyler Warren is.
Yes.
Like
Thank you.
it's like
Yes.
he's the better athlete. He's the better blocker. Now, I like Tyler Warren so much as well. He's my number 9 overall player. Really, really like him. They're different guys. Like it's almost like they play different positions. First time I watched Tyler Warren, I was shocked at how big he was because I thought he moved like a guy who was 6'3". I thought he was Brock Bowers size because of how agile he was and the fact that it's almost the Travis Kelce thing where he's not that fast, but he runs away from people. And you're kind of wondering, like, how the hell is he getting away with this? But he does it so consistently that it's a true attribute of his. The USC game is one of the best games I've ever seen a tight end play. And I know he was force fed the ball, but I love the different ways that he can attack a defense. So I'm a big, big fan of both guys. And I think they could each be a number one receiver if drafted to a team that has that need.
All right, and we're on the same page on the offensive lineman. Your same 3 first-round grades are my 3 same ones. I have one more, though, and maybe I'm being a little lenient with the injury. Josh Simmons' tape is so good, man. Like, if I'm
Yeah.
picking there at like 15 and he's sitting there and I know he's coming off it, it's more than an ACL. It's a patella tendon, which can sometimes be more serious. But, man,
Yep.
like his one-handed punch when you watch tape, he's just swatting guys away with like his inside arm. And I'm like, man, when this guy gets healthy, he might be, if he was healthy, man, he could be a top 5, 6 player in this class. Easy.
Yeah, it could have been. And I thought when he, mid-October when he went down, I thought he was playing better than any left tackle in college football. And I like the tape, the athleticism. Like he's the athlete at left tackle where you don't worry about some of the things you do with Kelvin Banks or Will Campbell. But again, the patella injury is tough. And I know he's already working out and doing some stuff, so that's a good sign. He's another one of those guys that's hard to get a read on because he was at San Diego State, then he goes to Ohio State. So that's something that I've heard mixed opinions on in terms of the character and the work ethic, and what kind of buy-in are you going to get from Josh Simmons? So that's something that I know he was at the Senior Bowl when we were there. I don't know if you knew this.
I did not.
Not as a participant. He wasn't on the Senior Bowl rosters, but he was in Mobile doing interviews with teams. I've heard of this happening in my 15 years doing this. It's usually a player getting ahead of something, like a report of, hey, like school wasn't sure about the buy-in. We need to get ahead of this. So I think with Josh Simmons, if we see him go top 15, you and I can talk in May, and your listeners, we could talk and be like, okay, there's nothing to that. If he goes in the late 20s, then maybe there's a little bit more to some of the buzz that's happening.
That's interesting. All right, the edge class is interesting. You have Carter and Jalen Walker. Those are my 2 top edges as well. I'm curious to see how teams use Walker because I think you can get maybe a little too creative with him and you might hurt him too much too early, but he's really, really good whatever you ask him to do. And my understanding is that kid's going to be like the CEO of a company one day. He's just like a notch human being. Now, I'm curious you did not get any other edge player up. And it's funny, I had this conversation a couple weeks ago. I forget with who it was. And that next group of edge players, every one of them has something you can point to that makes you think twice, right? Michael Williams played with the injury, production. Shamar Stewart, production. Mike Green, the transfer, right? He's not the biggest guy. Ezeraku, not the biggest guy. So is that why none of those guys in that next group managed to shimmy their way into a first round grade? There was just one thing that was kind of holding them back.
It's exactly that. You took the words out of my mouth. It is that one or two things for each of those guys. And I really challenged myself this year to not buy into hype on players. I really want to stick to my grade and what I saw and like the work that I've done. And like Michael Williams, I've been a Texas fan my entire life. You watch Michael Williams against Texas, you think he's gonna be a top 3 pick. You watch him against everyone else, and you're like, where was he? Like, what happened to this guy? So, and, same with Shamar Stewart, it's 1.5 sacks each of the last 3 seasons. And you can say, like, oh, the scheme asked me to do certain things, but not all, like, you still had to rush the quarterback in the SEC. You still, like, that still asked of you. And his run defense wasn't that good either. So if they were asking him to, stack and stack up the run, I didn't love his tape there either. Now, the potential of those guys is just astronomical. Izaraku, the production is amazing, but he's so undersized that it's almost like you have to go to a 3-4 team almost, to be an outside linebacker. Mike Green, you've got the transfer, the character. James Pierce, you've got the character and also lack of size. So all those guys who could very well end up being top 32 picks. I just wasn't comfortable saying this is one of my first round guys. Like if we have those types of questions, I don't want to put kind of an elite grade on you as a player.
Of those guys, which one has the best chance of cracking into the late of that top 10 with the team picking them because of what they could be?
I mean, Shamar Stewart, just because the freakish athletic ability, despite the lack of production, he looks like Myles Garrett did coming out just without the production, which is an important part of the equation, right? But I think we see it every year. Someone falls in love with, hey, we can mold this, and whether it be a quarterback or a pass rusher, they're so valuable that you almost take that chance if you get it.
Yeah, you have Mason Graham as your only defensive tackle. I would maybe slide Derek Harmon in there, but we talked about that. Linebacker, Jihad Campbell. Is it because you're not sure how teams are going to use him? Because it's funny.
Yep.
I always tell people when I explain Jihad Campbell to them. You're at the combine, and they put all the linebackers up in podiums next to each other. And I always play this game with my daughter. You show her a group of pictures. Which one of these don't belong? And Jihad Campbell was the one that didn't belong. He was like 20 pounds bigger and just a monster compared to Demetrius Knight is a really good football player. He's sitting there like 225 pounds, and Jihad Campbell looks like he plays a completely different position. So what was it that kept? I think he was like the first guy out, right?
He was, yeah.
So why did you not feel comfortable about Campbell with a first round pick?
Yeah, and I know, I love Jalen Walker, and so I understand there's a little hypocrisy in this, but I think it is just that how do you use him at the next level? Because I think as an off-ball linebacker, the instincts need developed, and that's not always something that gets developed. Sometimes that's a you have it or you don't skill.
I agree with that.
I've been burned by athletic linebackers in the past who never developed that read and react ability, as has the NFL, by the way. It's a hard thing to project. So with Campbell, if you told me like, hey, he's going to be a 3-4 rush backer, I would probably grade him a little higher, than I do as a true linebacker. But he also has very limited experience as a pass rusher. A lot of his pass rush production was on blitzes and on him kind of pulling the chain as a spy on quarterback. So he is a true project in every sense of the word. And if you'll notice, I have a lot of those guys grouped together, like Campbell. We talked about Michael Williams, Shamar Stewart. I have a lot of those guys together because I like them and I love the potential, but they are definitely, there's some gamble there.
Yeah, the Kenneth Murray, Devin Bush line of athletic linebackers is long.
Yeah.
Because they just don't have the instincts. I'm with
Jamin Davis.
Yep.
That was a first rounder by Washington that never panned out. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm with you. Corners, Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron. Will Johnson, I've been on all our program. Fans don't need to hear talk about it again. I have my worries with him on just allowing too many catches and not being sticky enough. Barron, I love. And by the way, I know some people see him as a slot. I think he was better outside at Syracuse than he was in the slot.
Yeah, I think for Barron, it's like if you want to play slot, okay, you beat Trent McDuffie, but I think he'll end up on the outside. He was so good. And just to watch his development down there, over the years to go from even playing safety to playing slot to playing outside. This past year with I think 5 picks, like 12 PBUs, he was amazing, and that whole defense at Texas stepped up this year. He was a huge part of that. So, and Will Johnson, I watched him and I think, how many business decisions is this guy making? Because he's known since he was a freshman he was going to be a first round pick. And so, you see with the tackling at times, I think he likes to play off and try to bait quarterbacks into mistakes. He's going to have to clean some of that up at the next level, but he's been so good anytime he's been out there.
All right, final one here. Safety. We talked about Malachi Starks already. I think he was, the second guy out looking in on
Yeah.
the top on your first round grades. Why no Nick Emenware with all the shit boxes he checks? By the way, not just testing. He's a heck of a football player, too. What was it on the tape that made you think twice?
Yeah, he was close. I had him as he was my number 17 overall player. I think it is just like I see some hesitation in his game. And I've talked to teams that saw the same thing. And they've even said, we think he'll be a weak side linebacker because of some of those hesitations in coverage. Like, you want him just attacking. That's what he does best. I mean, 6'3", 220. He ran a 4.4. You want that guy attacking. But some of those, delays in seeing it and going to do it. And that could just be, he's a true junior. He's inexperienced, especially in this era of college football. That could come with reps. That could be no issue. But that was the reason for keeping him out.
All right, final question. If there's one thing Giant fans, Matt, should know about this draft before we get to it at the end of April that they should mentally prepare themselves for, what should it be?
I think that it's a much deeper draft than it has been sold. So much talk during the fall was that this is not a good draft class. It is. It's just light on elite players at the top. It's light on blue chip players. It is strong in round 2, 3, 4, and even day 3. And I can't wait to get to Green Bay to cover day 3. There are a lot of really good college football players who are going to go on day 3 that are going to be contributors in the NFL. So don't fall asleep on this draft just because somebody said in November it's not a good draft class. It absolutely is. And your team still has picks they got to use. So let's find out who these players are and get excited about the future.
Matt, tell the folks where they can find everything you're up to and anything you want them to know.
Yeah, I mean, ESPN.com. I feel like every day right now, some new piece of content is coming out. So, and I just learned this, John. Someone told me they didn't know if you have Disney Plus, like for your kids to watch TV, you can actually read all of our articles. If you have Disney Plus, if you're paying for that to watch cartoons and stuff, get on ESPN.com and read our articles. You're paying for it. So get on there and read it.
You can, and it's great stuff. You, Jordan, Mel, you guys do a great job. Field Yates, your draft team is really second to none, Matt. We appreciate the time. Thanks so much. Enjoy Shador Sanders Pro Day. Enjoy the rest of the process, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, bud.
Matt Miller from ESPN. That's the Giants Huddle Podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. From the Hackensack Meridian Health Podcast Studio, keep getting better. We'll see you next time, everybody.